field engineers will go to a project to load, test, commission, right? So you want to give them the tools they need to get in and get out of there. If they don't have those tools, they fill in the blanks themselves. And what I mean by that is they'll push a button expecting something to happen that was not a part of the scope. We already discussed when you push the button, that's going to happen. But when they go in and push this button and that what they think is supposed to happen doesn't happen, they may change the functionality because they think it's a problem.
I didn't ask for a completely reasonable excuse. I asked you to get busy.
Very well.
Isn't that the same machine that makes noses?
It can do other things. Why shouldn't it?
So what goes into successful programming? There's more than just writing code. It requires so many different things, from process to controlling variables. All that and more on A State of Control. Episode 118, The Code is the Code. Welcome to A State of Control, an AVNation podcast that highlights the control programming and automation aspects of the audiovisual industry. My name is Steve Greenblatt. I'm your host. Thanks for joining us today. So today we're going to talk about a topic that I hope a lot of programmers will be able to relate to. And what it really involves is all the things that go into making a project successful, in addition to writing good code and doing the programming. So we'll have some more to say on that shortly. And before we get to that, I'd like to introduce two of our returning guests. And first and foremost, I have to say hi to my partner here at A State of Control, Uncle Richie, Rich Fregosa. How are you, Rich?
I'm doing good. Mellow West Coast greetings. I am actually finally back into my office after a little mishap that caused almost the relocation of the lab, but back up and running, actually back at my desk for the first time in a little bit. So
you put the life rafts away.
I'm telling you, it was a little crazy, but yeah, I was regaling you with the tales of woe here with electronics and why backups are important, kids.
And water and electricity don't go well
don't
together.
Mix.
No.
And so I'd like to say hi to a couple of returning guests. As I mentioned, they both frequented our show quite a bit. The last one for this guest was episode 114. He's a friend and somebody who I've known for quite some time. His name is Marc LaVecchia from BMA Software Solutions. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, brother. Good to be here again. Always look forward to these conversations.
Glad to have you. And last but not least, another frequent guest and another friend, somebody I've known for quite some time, as I have mentioned on other podcasts. He's last with us in episode 110, and he's also the one who brought this topic to me to share. And his name is Brian Magrogan, and he's from Verrex. Welcome back, Brian.
Thank you, Steve. Very much appreciate you having me back. And this is going to be an interesting topic to talk about. It's very fresh in my mind at the moment.
That's great to hear. I'm glad to talk about stuff that I know is important. And with that said, we all know, you know, all the things, all the gotchas, all the little things we have to prepare for that go into programming. And a lot of people tend to ask, why does this cost so much? Why does it take so long? Why is this so complicated? And it's really hard to explain unless you're really hands-on and you really understand or you've been through it. But when you have, and you realize that you didn't even budget enough time or resources or money, that's when it really, the rubber hits the road. So what I'm talking about is, you know, what do you have to do to prepare for a successful project? So Rich, I know that you have these conversations quite a lot, and we've talked about this, and you're really great at educating clients and setting the stage, but what does it take to really explain to somebody all that goes into making a programming project successful if you haven't really been doing it or you don't really have that firsthand experience?
Honestly, the first conversation, whether you're an integrator with an in-house team or whether you're a third-party person working with integrators, you have to sit down and say, look, do you want to make enough money to stay in business next year? You have to, that's the first question you have to ask, is like, do you want to stay in business? Do you want to have enough money to pay yourself? If you don't do these things, you will not be here. And it's rough because, you know, yeah, again, we always talk about Resi, and, you know, Resi is always kind of like a rock and roll lifestyle. I tend to have this conversation more with Resi. than I do with, commercial and education. But, it's just same song, different verse a lot of times, depending on the organization, because it's easy in the course of a project to cut corners in order to get it done. It's just human nature. And typically, the more people involved in a project, the more the corners are willing to be cut, or to be, kick that can down the line to somebody who's willing to accept the corners being cut. Then, and I've always, one of the mantras that I always have with somebody is like, nobody enforces a contract at the beginning of a project, right? Everybody gets upset and tries to enforce everything at the end of a project, right? Nobody gets sued at the beginning of a job, right? And a big part of it is that, and the thing is that it can go the other way. I've seen other instances where the process itself became the focus as opposed to what you're trying to accomplish with the process. So you have these, complete polar opposites. And the biggest thing is finding ways to come in between. And like, Mark and I always talk about like the sports analogies. As a company, you need to learn to play within yourself, right? If you're a weekend warrior guy in the gym, throwing up jump shots and stuff, well, you're not going to be sitting there trying to work on your dunk move, right? It's great. That's what potentially should be happening, but that's not who you are as a company in that moment. And a big part of the conversation has to be, and I've said it before, right? Learn to be ruthless with your weaknesses, right? Be ruthless with them. And then find ways to expand out. Some companies are great at communication, bad at documentation. Some companies are great at documentation, bad at communication after the first time, right? How many times have we gotten a wonderful plan set, right? They go into the job, mid-project changes happen. Everybody's like, okay, shaking hands, moving forward, this works. You get a problem 2 years later, you come back, not a single thing has been redlined. Not a single change has occurred. That original document, right? It was pristine. It doesn't even match. What ended up doesn't match. So where does that all come back from? Is that process, right? Is how can you do what's necessary without overburdening yourself, right? Because if something becomes a chore, you're going to procrastinate. And so, from a team standpoint, a lot of time, what we spend time talking about, which is process is great, but if it's not working, if you're more worried about the how than the why, you will not sustain it. And the key to any of these projects long-term, right, is how did you sustain it? How did you create a situation where future you isn't just sitting going, we're going to lose our asses on this, right? Because everybody's been paid, right? Commissions have been paid, vendors have been paid, all, everybody who had their hand out, right? Everybody's been put in their palms. You come down and you're trying to keep that client. And you want to make sure, right? Mark will say, like, again, why does it keep people 10, 15, 20 plus years? Because you're working on sustainability. You're not working in that moment. And it's tough because you're getting the client pressure or the PM or the tech team, or all of a sudden, right, at the last minute of walkthrough, how many people have had the C-level execs come through and go, oh, maybe you could ... And in every organization, right, they have an entire team underneath them that their entire job is to support yes. Oh, we can do it. No problem, right? Without the ramifications. And you don't want to be the other one on the side being able to tell somebody, no, you didn't think this through, and slap them on the hand. But if the process is in place, if you've done all your due diligence on the front side, you're able to reduce it a little bit. But again, the first time that happens in our project, and we tell all these war stories, right? But if you're still doing it 20 years later, then something basic, right? Your fundamentals, like the fundamentals of sports, right? If you're not doing something simple, like just learning to bend your knees to drop your hips to catch a grounder, all right? And you're still standing up and wondering why it's going through your legs, that's a fundamental. And we get so caught up in the sexy part of what we do and the geez whiz and all of these things. And look how fantastic we are. But we forget the fundamentals at that point. That's when problems come in. to the point being of, that's when you start losing money. And whether you're an employee, whether you're the owner of a company, whether you're partnering with somebody, again, your job promotion, your long-term sustainability, right? When you come in and you ask for a raise, okay, how successful are your projects? Were you part of the solution, or were you the one that was saying, oh man, they threw that on me, there was nothing I could do, that project was messed up from the beginning, I don't want to talk. Every office that I've been around, right? You can go to any field tech, you can go to any project manager, it's going to be that same conversation. So that comes back to the point, which is like, okay, great. We know it's an issue. Let's not run from it. But that's the hardest part, right? We always want to say, oh, it's not our company. Our company does X, Y, and Z. Look at our webpage. Look at our About Us. Look at the projects we've completed. Have you ever noticed on a projects we've completed, they never list the things they messed up? Right? They never talk about the time that they were screamed at 2 hours before the project was closing because nothing's done. It's and it's in every industry, but our industry is super guilty of it. And again, we've all been here long enough that if you talk to somebody who's experienced in the industry, right, that's where the wisdom comes from and the humility comes from, which is I messed up. I remember 10 years ago, I did this. I blew it. I'm lucky I have a job, right? But when you're newer or younger or smaller, you're still focusing on how am I perceived versus, and it's the flash versus the craftsmanship, right? And being a craftsman in what you do comes from the humility, right? All the jokes, right? It was the old plumber charges, $5,000 and all he did was knock something with a hammer. Why? Because I knew where to look. That's what you have to be as a company. You have to grow into the company that says, I knew where to look. Not, the years of experience so that I knew where to look. And so, that is in a nutshell, the conversation that I try to have with integrators, which is, it's okay to be humble. It's okay to let your work stand for itself, but you've also got to be willing to fess up. And if you're not willing to fess up, that's a deeper issue as a company, right? That's a deeper issue. If you're consciously looking to hide your problems because it's easier and you don't look as bad, it'll work for a while. We've seen the rides in the economy, right? Everybody was doing great pre-internet crash, bubble burst, boom. 50% of companies, in resi. We had the housing crisis, right? We have COVID. We have all of these things that are happening. There are going to be economic conditions that are going to just knock you out because you're no longer just, somebody throws a nickel and hits an integrator to do it. Work will dry up in cycles at times. And it's easy to go ahead and just say, oh, we'll worry about it later when you've got all these jobs coming in. Everybody gets super serious when all of a sudden things get a little tight and they see that pipeline start to crunch up and you get that uh-oh moment, right? You don't want to live in the uh-oh, but you have to operate as if uh-oh's gonna happen, and not to the point that it freezes you, but it's enough to keep you honest. And so, again, like I said, I try not to bring the gloom and doom, but sometimes, it is that you have to have those conversations with yourself. I mean, nobody likes pointing out their flaws. Nobody wants to. But if you're going to be good at what you do, you have to be willing to at least acknowledge them.
So how do we get ourselves in a position at the beginning of a project to make sure that we're going to be successful at the end? And you bring up process, which is critical. And I think that depending on who we're dealing with, for example, Brian, you work for an integrator, right? I have an independent firm that gets hired by integrators. And two things will happen in that scenario as we're beginning a project. Either you're coming to me at the onset, I have a customer, I have a project, I want to meet with you and talk about the scope and the project itself and the customer themselves and where we sit, and let's work together to come up with a number and a plan and a scope of work and the documentation that breaks down what we expect this system to do and how we expect it to do it and what time frame. And we'll get to the money later. The alternate to that becomes, I have a job, I've sold it, I've got the budget, here's my drawings, here's my scope of work, can you do it for me? The first thing that we're going to do in either one of those scenarios for us, and I find that this is something that lacks dramatically in our business, is as we work through understanding our own internal issues that need to be dealt with, the first thing we need to do is eliminate the things that are going to trip us up. So we need to find out first and foremost who this customer is. We need to find out who's going to be using the rooms. Is it the same people all the time, or is it different people that may come into an open room that we have to have simplicity on the control system? Have they had experiences before in the past with control systems? And if so, what were they? Because what I want to find out is what didn't work for them to make sure that we don't repeat that for them. We talk a lot about the user experience, but that begins and ends with making sure that we understand what the customer wants and we present to them what we know we're going to deliver, and we do it in a manner that by the time we turn this job over, there isn't anybody hopefully standing around saying, well, this is cool, but it would be really cool. That's where things fall apart. And so, for example, one of our first questions to when we begin the process of going through the submittals for the way the system's going to function, one of the very first questions we ask is, are the decision makers in the room right now? Are you in the room? And if they're not in the room, can you bring them into the room? Because what we don't want to do is have this meeting 4 times and then you go, okay, I'm going to bring my boss in and show him what we've done. That just a simple part of that process like that is what from the beginning makes things easier as you go down the lane. So when you turn over the system, they get what you told them they were going to get. And once you set that expectation in the beginning, you have to get in early enough. Then by the time you turn it over, everybody's happy with what they get. Typically, they're going to want to maybe tweak some things and stuff. And what we tell them, like our guys all have notepads that are specifically the what would be cool notepad. And the minute that somebody says, it would be cool, they hand that person the notepad and say, start taking notes. And when we're done with the original scope that we all agreed upon, then we'll come back and we'll revisit this. But if we start chasing those things because there's the yes person in there, then you're going to lose money, you're going to go off the rails, and everything's going to fail.
I think there's another point there too, Mark, right? The monetary side of it, that is the human cost to that, right? With scope creep and with letting the yes person just be there and go, is it really drags everything down. You made a really interesting point with the decision makers, right? Because sometimes that's really hard to identify who that person is, right? And who is the person that at the beginning of that you said, identify the end user, right? The people that are actually going to use the system, not necessarily the decision maker in that scenario, right? Because the decision maker thinks they know everything. I know the way I like a UI to function, right? But I'm not the one using that one. So I bring my experience to it, but I also have to find the user who has to use that room day in and day out every single day and make sure that they're there. And I find that a big portion of that is documentation along the way, right? At every step. You said right away, scope of work. That's got to be there. If it's not, you're set up for failure right at the very beginning of it. And it's got to be not detailed to this button does X, Y, Z, A, B, C behind the scenes. But when this is pressed, this is going to happen. I don't need to tell you every little step along the way, but there's got to be detail there, not just, we're going to turn the room on and off, etc. So that, and then keeping that documentation, right? Screenshots, theory of ops, making sure that, so at the end, right, when you said to come in and say, oh, it'd be really cool if it did this. Yes, this is what we talked about. We're going to get through this list. We're going to make sure that everything's working for you. And then after this is done, we can talk about the cool thing that you'd like it to do.
And let's talk about that document, because that document is the roadmap right here. Rich brought up 2 phrases that I believe ride with each other all the time: documentation and communication. Steve's heard me say this a million times. Documentation and communication are undefeated. They never lose. Okay. Now,
Yep.
If you maintain your documentation and your communication in written form throughout the process, you will win. Even if the project goes sideways, you'll be able to say, this is what we agreed to. This is what you told me to do. Now, that document for us is an important roadmap, because not only does it give them the functionality, we do a page by page turn. this is when you press this button, this is what happens. Maybe it has some back end stuff, but for all intents and purposes, you press a button on this page, this is what happens. And then we take that through the process. And the reason that that's important is by the time that gets to the field engineer to commission the system, oftentimes they don't know what they're commissioning. They're just walking into it, right? Would you agree? Like they go to a job,
Yeah,
load
absolutely.
the code, it comes up and they start pushing buttons to see what breaks.
Right. And I mean, I'm kind of lucky in that scenario working for the integrator, right? We have a couple different core customers, and so our engineers get to understand exactly how they function. But I feel like in the way that you work, you've got customers all over the place, and this engineer has no idea how this worked. So coming in totally blind to it, you can get a lot of questions and earn up a lot of programmers' time answering questions about functionality, where if you have that document, here you go. Start here. If something seems out of whack, please let's note it, right? Let's run through the whole thing once, note it, and then bring that back to me and we'll review it together.
Yeah, and something that a lot of people don't realize in that scenario where we're dealing with different integrators is field engineers will go to a project to load, test, commission, right? So you want to give them the tools they need to get in and get out of there. If they don't have those tools, they fill in the blanks themselves. And what I mean by that is they'll push a button expecting something to happen that was not a part of the scope. We already discussed when you push the button, that's going to happen. But when they go in and push this button and that what they think is supposed to happen doesn't happen, they may change the functionality because they think it's a problem.
Yep. That's a really good point, right? And they may say something in front of who was the decision maker, and then they're like, wait a minute, we should have done that all of a sudden.
Brian, when you do a system for one of your customers, do you have them sign off on like functionality of the system?
Yeah, I mean, in the perfect scenario, right, we go through a whole set of screenshot reviews, we go through a functionality review, theory of ops, and all of that is documented in email, signed off on, yes, this is what we want. And, we put in stuff in there of, we understand this is going to change a little bit, within reason, we'll update as we go, but any major changes do not fall within the project timeline, which is what I think is very important, right, is the making sure we stick to timeline in that scenario, but may come at a cost, right? We want to do what's best for the customer. We want to do, what makes our systems work well, what makes your life easy, but that's not always free too, right? To go back to the monetary side, as Rich was saying, you've got to stay in business, right? You got to be able to do that work. So that's protecting everybody all around.
And a lot of people don't do this, and which surprises me, but day one is here. Well, if day one's I need you to sign off on the functionality by here. And if you don't sign off by here, then we're not going to be where you want us to be at the end of this project. That kind of communication and documentation is what I'm talking about. It's critical.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things too that needs to be laid out there, like you said at the very end, of if you don't have this to me by this date, I don't make this date. Right? I feel like as programmers, especially on your side as well, but we're the very end of the job, right? It's got to get installed. It's got to get powered up. It's got to get wired. They've got to test through all the functionality. They've got to update firmware. We are the last person in there. And as that time frame has compressed because the GC didn't have the site ready, the room didn't have AC yet, so we couldn't power stuff on. It wasn't ready for equipment to go in. We had cabling issues. The low voltage contractor couldn't get in there in time. All of a sudden, my 15-day window to have this fully turned over and done is now 3 days. How do I make 3 days work and provide a good product in the end? So, that becomes very key there.
So with that said, Brian, what have you seen to be successful, or what can we do to, because it comes down to sometimes saying no, which people don't like to hear. And sometimes it just requires really effective project management. And the project manager has to be able to believe and trust in the programmer and be able to support them. What have you seen work before?
Well, I think, Mark started with it is process, right? And Rich said it too. And we can't get stuck in the process, but there are key aspects of that process that have to happen to be successful. In my world, and Mark, I'm sure in your world as well, QA is invaluable. An hour spent in QA is 4 hours in the field at the very least. right? I have guys there that I know exactly their capabilities. I know that they're going to do everything they can do before they reach out to me. And then we're going to dig in. Once you get in the field, there's so many variables. So you can't skip that. You can't do it. I would much rather push back at that point. And, sometimes there's a deliverable of rack's supposed to hit the field by this date. It's not ready to go to the field by that date. If I delivered on that date, add 2 more weeks on the backside of it. So having that conversation, you said it, Steve, saying no is really hard. I hate saying no internally to people that I am a lot more blunt with things. I don't like to tell them that, no, I'm sorry, I can't do that. I want to be the team player. I want to make sure we're providing everything, but pushing back appropriately. And I think also having the backup from your other teams, i.e., the project manager might be there. Yep, no, we're not going to do this. But then when the client turns around and runs back to the sales guy, and the sales guy's like, oh, we got to make it happen. So having your whole team on the same page is extremely important, right? And again, we want to maintain a relationship, right? We want to do everything we can do for you to turn that over, but we also want your stuff to be stable. We want your system to work as well as it can, and you can't fit it all in, if you haven't hit all the right milestones and right processes.
And so how do you say no, right? And one of the things, because I don't like this, I'm a sales guy, I'm not a programmer, even though I have a programming firm. So I want to say yes. Yes is how you pay the bills. But how do you say no? And so the way that has worked for me is when I talk to my customers, they're like, I need you to get this done within this time, or I need you to do this, whatever it is. I tell them, look, I can say yes, and this can get screwed up. Okay. I can say no, and you can maybe go find someone else to do it, or, get somebody pissed off or something like that. What I do know is I can only recover from one of those. Okay. I can say no and get out of here and we'll do business again. But if I say yes and I screw up your job, very difficult to recover from that. And that's not the kind of relationship that I want to have with you. 9 out of 9 times that works. And they're like, yep, you're right. Let's just stick to the plan.
Right. And right there with that point too, right? Unlike the old days, people don't stay at a company for 30, 40, 50 years, however long. So, if you go to the yes person all of a sudden and they're working for company A, in 5 years, they might be working for company B and your name is off the table, when they're coming in. So, it's making sure that your business is stable in the future as well. Right. And that includes, like you said, having a difficult conversation. It's never fun to say no, but like you framed it, right? We want to do what's right for you. And that's why I'm saying no right now.
I'm going to shift gears a little bit because I think it's important to talk about, and we do have to wrap up shortly after that. But Rich, I wanted just to touch on the fact that we can do all these things and have all the pieces in place, but if we're not getting the support from the client, that can make things go awry. And what I mean by that is sometimes we need to be able to have IP addresses, network access, security clearance, all those types of things. How do we go about that most effectively?
It's the help me help you, right? I come in and I'm like, here's our document, right? Here's our one sheet. Here's what we normally do. And you got a choice. Do you want to fill in the blanks, or do you have a document? Or, you know what? We're already there. We're already going to be pre-commissioning stuff. We may be pre-racking over here. Hey, you want me to take care of some of this for you? And you build it into your scope. Like our scope, our running line is that, I hope to never change order somebody. I hope that my pricing takes into account the costs that you don't know. And so that when you call me, I go, no problem. I planned for it, right? There is a big difference in that conversation at that point. Because, and Mark is great at that. And again, like rewind and listen to all the things that these two guys are saying, because there's gold. It's like, it's how to run a successful business 101, right? Just do the simple stuff, right? But stick to it. And, that rewinding part is that, Brian was saying, is like, how do you wind up like when it's back down to company A and company B? Why is company A going to be there? Because I liked them. And the reason why I liked them is they helped me. They didn't now keep in mind, we didn't hand money away. We didn't discount it. I didn't say, I'm going to reduce what I make to make you happy. I'm going to charge what's fair and bring value here. And that, where does it all start? How do you get client buy-in? Value, right? I'm here. I'm not as important as your CTO, but in this moment, I'm here to help. I'm one less headache. And the teams, the external teams, will appreciate that. But it's tough, right? How do I overstep? Because it's real simple. You don't want to have, 15 different emails that are going out, but at those crucial moments, right? Especially at the beginning of a project. Hey, look, I know you're swamped. I know there's tight timelines. I know you got 40 other projects going on. I know you've got people spread thin. One of the services we provide is ... Now, we do charge for that. I can build it into our fees. It's just kind of part and parcel of how we take care of things. It's an a la carte menu in this moment. Do you need that? No, we don't. Well, then if they check off, I do not want ... then you've given the option to hold their feet to the fire a little bit more, right? Then that's the leverage proposition. Well, I didn't know . No, we sat down and again, hey, we can fix it. It's no problem. But there was a reason why we had this conversation. You opted out and you decided you could afford to be optimistic. I get it. At the same point now you can't make me responsible for the fact that I informed you, right? You can't say I didn't know because you did know. And so, building that relationship, right? Is you don't shame your clients, but it's okay to make your clients accountable. And that comes over experience and years and learning how to do it. But again, it's the people side of things, right? It's like Mark says, sales is just, a project is just as much the psychological and the interpersonal as it is the technical. And you got to be willing to understand that. Even though you don't like it, even though you're not a people person, you got to understand that part of what you're doing requires you being a people person. And if you don't have a people person, find a people person and put them in front.
We don't all just sit in caves as programmers, Rich. We're people. We're people. You brought up something there about like making sure you have the right tools, right? Making sure that you have the right access to things. And I believe that has to be provided up front of, hey, this is what I need, XYZ. And if you can't provide XYZ, let's have a conversation about that. Like, I have to have access to the network. I have to, if there's a security concern about it, let's talk about it and why, and how do we do that? And if we can't meet these, let's talk about what happens to the time frame, right? I can't be expected to be flying totally blind and be able to complete it in the same time frame as if I've got the tools that I need, right? I can make it happen in the end, but if I've got to load one time as opposed to 6 times because I can't see live what's happening, that changes the conversation. So,
What's interesting about this conversation is what we're talking about is how can we be more successful with our customers, with our clients, with our projects, with everything that we're doing. We haven't even talked about code.
Yeah, that's a real good point.
The code is probably the easiest part of this whole equation. And that's why what we do is often overlooked and underappreciated. People see it as just you're writing code, get it to me when you go. When they don't realize that code needs to absolutely have a seat at the big boys table at the beginning of the project from the onset. And I tell our customers, because they're integrators, do me a favor, when you order hardware for that project, that's the time to order my programming. A lot of times they wait till the racks are built and they go, okay, we're ready for you. Bring it in the beginning, because this process, this management of the process is where we are at our best. Code is the code. Some of us are really good at complex code and so forth, but in the end, the code is the code. If you know the functionality and the language that you're using, the code is the code. It's the process and the way that you handle the process and the way that you take care of the customers that differentiates where code now suddenly has a value to everybody.
Yep.
And that's really that's the key that everybody misses. They don't understand how I can stay in business when one of the 6 of us doesn't write code.
You actually said when you order hardware. I would argue it's actually even before that, right? There are a lot of things that...
Oh, if I could. If I could.
Yeah, there are a lot of things that we can make happen if the right hardware is there. Right, but if you want the Ferrari functionality, but you want to pay for the Pinto, there are going to be sacrifices there, right? So pointing that out ahead of time of, sure, if we're trying to save costs, we can do this. But hey, A is off the table, right? And A is off the table for this reason. We're not trying to be difficult, but that device does not do that in the way that this one did.
Well, or even more to the point, which is why you want us in the forefront.
Yep.
You show me your bill of materials, and I look at that piece of material, and I'm going, I don't think you want to bring that in here.
Yeah.
This thing has given a lot of people a lot of headaches,
Mm-hmm.
and we would recommend maybe this, because this product isn't supported by the manufacturer with a module or a plug-in or a driver. Right. So let's not learn in the field with these people. Let's go with this device. See Steve smiling? See?
Yeah.
Steve, I got you. Modules, plug-in, drivers. The trifecta of Steve's world. But it's the truth. In the beginning, we get to see what that bill of materials is. And many times my customers will come to me and they'll say, do you see anywhere where we should maybe swap out equipment? Yeah, I take this and get it out of here, because we haven't been able to make that work in the last 4 months. And I hear there's a new firmware coming out. Let's not learn. Let other people learn on it. So
yeah,
I didn't mean to go off the rail there, but that's, again, it's part of before we even program, this is where we come into play.
I'm going to wrap it up at that point, but that's a great place for us to stop, and probably a conversation that we'll continue to have, but we're really good. Thank you guys. And I agree with Rich, rewind and take this all in, because these are good lessons to be learned, and you don't get this type of experience to benefit from all that often. So with that said, I'd like to thank our guests for being part of this show. First off is Marc LaVecchia from BMA. How can people get in touch with you, learn more about your company?
We're not very marketing oriented. I have a website, bmasoftwaresolutions.com, but what I tell people is just open the window and yell. I should hear you.
It's almost like Googling you.
If you yell loud enough, I'll find you.
And next, Brian Magrogan from Verrex. How can people get in touch with you and learn more about Verrex?
As Uncle Richie would say, you can find me on the interwebs at pretty much all the social medias at bmagrogan. And you can find Verrex on the internet at verrex.com, and we'd be happy to help you with anything you need.
Fantastic. And Rich, another great show, and lots of good stuff and lots of good content on this one. How can people continue the conversation and get in touch with you and learn more about Fregosa Designs?
You can find me on the internet, on the interwebs, as Brian said, at rfregosa is the socials. Fregosadesign.com is the website. First and foremost, I hope that you find me somewhere on AVNation.tv here with my partner, or with all of our other shows that cover all of the other verticals in the AV marketplace, including Resi Week, AV Week, and there's some great shows that are out there. And again, honestly, visit the website and just kind of close your eyes and pick a show. We talk about craftsmanship. There's a wealth of knowledge, and the fact that, again, between the three of you, there's X amount of decades of combined experience and still doing it. And there's a reason. And, again, for anybody starting out, anybody who, just wants to have the conversations that you wish you could have with somebody. I mean, that's the information that you're getting here, is that if you could run into somebody at a trade show and, sit down with them and have a soda and say, hey, tell me about X, right? That's really what these shows are about, right? It's the opportunity for professionals like this to reach out and say, I really want to help you. But I can't throw a class, or I've got this or other things. And so this is about as close as you're going to get to have that one-on-one conversation. And then when you do see them at the trade show, it is an opportunity for you to walk up to them and say, hey, I saw your show on ... Tell me about, and I guarantee you, if at all possible, that person will stop and say, awesome, let's talk about it. Or here's my number, call me. Don't underestimate, the willingness of everybody who is in all of these shows, who really want to be of service. They really do. I mean, we run our own companies, and hey, brothers got to make a buck, but on top of it, we really do want to help. So anyway, that's my plug for AVNation and why you should support them and our sponsors.
Well said. And I agree. And I second that. And there's nothing better than when listeners come up and say hello to us and take a selfie or let us know that they've been listening. Cause sometimes it's hard and we don't get that type of feedback, but it really is true that we do this for the benefit of the industry. And I think that there's a lot of great stuff here, and as well as on AVNation. For me, you can reach me at Steve Greenblatt on social media, my company, Control Concepts, at controlconcepts.net. And since Mark brought it up, we do have some drivers, modules, and plugins on our website. We work with manufacturers to help them with API integration, and we also do some free utilities that programmers can benefit from. We like serving the programmer community in that way, so check that out. And as Rich said, there's so much that you can find on the avnation.tv, and while you're there, please leave us a rating, review, comment, and let us know you're out there. Share your favorite episode, and let's just keep this conversation going, and we'll be back next time for another episode of A State of Control.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AV Nation.
This is AVNation.